The Chronicle of Peru by Pedro Cieza de León, a Spanish conquistador and chronicler who lived from 1520 to 1554. Translated to English by Clements R. Markha for the Hakluyt Society of London, England. Narration by AWS Polly. All content is in the public domain. Chapter 41. Concerning the villages beyond Quito as far as the royal palaces of Tumabamba, and of some customs of the natives. The distance from the city of Quito to the palaces of Tumabamba is 53 leagues. Soon after leaving the city there is a village called Panzalillo, the natives of which differ in some things from their neighbors, especially in the fillets or bands round their heads, for by these bands the descent of the Indians is known, and the provinces of which they are natives. These and all the other natives of the kingdom, over a space of more than 1,200 leagues, speak the general language of the Incas, being that which is used in Cusco. They generally speak this language, because such is the order of the Incas, and it was a law throughout the kingdom that this language should be used. Fathers were punished if they neglected to teach it to their sons in their childhood, yet, notwithstanding that they speak the language of Cusco, all these tribes had a language of their own which was spoken by their ancestors. Thus, those of Panzalillo had a different language from those of Carrack and Otavalo. The people of Panzalillo are dressed in shirts without sleeves or collars, with openings at the sides for their arms, and above for their heads. They also have large mantles of wool or cotton. The mantles of the chiefs were very fine, and were dyed with many bright colors. For shoes they use certain usadas, made from a root or herb called cabuya, which forms great leaves, out of which very useful white fibers are drawn, like hemp. Of these they make their usadas, or sandals, which serve as shoes, and they wear the ends of these fibers as a covering for their heads. Some of the women wear the very graceful dress of those of Cusco, with a long mantle extending from the neck to the feet, having holes for the arms. Round the waist they fasten a very broad and graceful belt called chumpi, which tightens and secures the mantle. Over this they wear another fine mantle falling from the shoulders, and coming down so as to cover the feet, called liela. To secure their mantles they wear pins of gold and silver, rather broad at one end, called topu. On the head they wear a very graceful band, which they call uncha, and the usadas, or sandals, complete their attire. In short, the dress of the ladies of Cusco is the most graceful and rich that has been seen up to this time in all the Indies. They are very careful in combing out their hair, and wear it very long. In another place I will treat more fully of this dress of the palace, or ladies of Cusco. Between this village of Panzalillo and the city of Quito there are some scattered villages here and there among the hills. To the westward are the valleys of Uchillo and Langazi, where the land, which is very fertile, yields many of those products concerning which I wrote in the chapter on the foundation of Quito. The inhabitants are not hostile to each other, nor do they eat human flesh, and they are not so wicked as some of those in the provinces which we have passed. Formerly they adored many idols, according to their own report, but after they were conquered by the king's Incas, they offered their sacrifices to the sun, and worshipped it as a god. Here a road leads to the forests of Yumbo, where the natives are not so serviceable nor so docile as those of Quito, but, on the contrary, proud and vicious. They live in a rugged and inaccessible district, which is, however, very rich by reason of the warmth and fertility. These people also worship the sun, and resemble their neighbors in their habits and customs, for, like them, they were subjugated by the great Tupac Inca Yupanqui and his son Huayna Capac. Another road leads towards the rising of the sun, where there is a province called Quijos, inhabited by Indians with the same manners and customs. 3 leagues beyond Panzalillo are the buildings and village of Mulahalo, which though now small from the desertion of its inhabitants, was, in ancient times, a station where there were lodgings for the Incas and their captains when they traveled on this road, and great store of provisions for the troops. On the right hand of the village of Mulahalo there is a fiery mouth, or volcano, of which the Indians say that, in former times, it threw out great quantities of stones and cinders, insomuch that many villages were destroyed by them. Some pretend that, before the eruption, infernal visions were seen, and trembling voices heard. What these Indians say of the volcano appears to be certainly true, for at the time Don Pedro de Alvarado, formerly governor of the province of Guatemala, entered Peru with his armed force by way of these provinces of Quito, it rained cinders for several days, as several Spaniards assert who came with Alvarado. They must have burst from some fiery mouth, as there are many in these mountains which would yield much sulfur. A little beyond Mulahalo are the village and great buildings called Lactachunga, which were as important as those of Quito. The buildings, though now in ruins, give signs of their former grandeur, and in some of the walls the niches may be seen where the golden sheep and other valuable things which they carved, were kept. The buildings set apart for the king's Incas, and the temple of the sun, where they performed their sacrifices and superstitions, were especially remarkable for these precious things. There were also many virgins here, dedicated to the service of the temple, whom they called Mama Kuna. In this village the Lords Incas placed a superintendent, who had charge of the collection of tribute in the neighboring provinces, and stored it here, where there were also a great number of mitimes. The Incas, considering that the center of their dominion was the city of Cusco, whence they promulgated laws, and sent forth their captains to war, and that Quito was 600 leagues distant, while the road to Chile was still longer, and considering, also, that all this vast extent of country was peopled by barbarous, and some of them very warlike tribes, they adopted the following system in order to keep the empire in greater security. It was first commenced in the time of King Inca Yupanqui, father of the great Tupac Inca Yupanqui, and grandfather of Huayna Capac. As soon as a province was conquered, 10 or 12,000 men were ordered to go there with their wives, but they were always sent to a country where the climate resembled that from which they came. If they were natives of a cold province, they were sent to a cold one, and if they came from a warm province, they went to a warm one. These people were called mitimes, which means Indians who have come from one country and gone to another. They received grants of land on which to work, and sites on which to build their houses. The Incas decreed that these mitimes should always obey the orders of the governors and captains who were placed over them, so that if the natives rebelled, the mitimes, who owed obedience to their captains, would punish them and force them into the service of the Incas. Consequently, if there was any disturbance among the mitimes themselves, they were attacked by the natives. By this policy these Lords Incas kept their empire safe and free from rebellion, and the provinces were well supplied with provisions, for most of the inhabitants of each were natives of some other country. They also adopted another plan, in order that they might not be detested by the natives. They never deprived the native caciques of their inheritance, and if any one of them was so guilty as to merit deprivation, the vacant office was given to his sons or brothers, and all men were ordered to obey them. In my book of the Incas I treat more fully of this system of mitimes than I am able to do here. To return to what I was saying, these Indians, called mitimes, in the station of Hakluyt, were ordered to obey the officer appointed by the Inca. Around the buildings were the farms and villages of the chiefs and officers, which were well supplied with provisions. When the last battle was fought in Peru, which was in the valley of Zacuixaguana, where Gonzalo Pizarro was put to death, we set out from the government of Popayan with the Adelantado Don Sebastian de Belalcázar, and little less than 200 Spaniards, to take the side of His Majesty against the tyrants, and some of us arrived at this village, for we did not all march along the same road, lest there should be difficulty in obtaining food and other necessaries. In one direction there were plenty of rabbits, in another pigs, in another fowls, and so on with sheep and lambs, and thus all were provided for. The natives of this village all go about dressed in shirts and mantles, each one as richly and gallantly adorned as his means will allow. The women also go dressed in the same way as those of Mulahalo, and they speak almost the same language. All their houses are of stone, roofed with straw, some being large, and others small, according to the rank and wealth of the occupants. The captains and lords have many women, but there is one principal and legitimate wife, through whom the lordship is inherited. They worship the sun, and when the chiefs die, they make large tombs in the mountains and plains, where they bury his gold and silver jewels, arms, clothes, and live women, not the ugliest, with the body, together with plenty of provisions. This custom of thus burying the dead is adopted throughout the greater part of the Indies by advice of the devil, who gives the people to understand that they will thus be well provided for when they arrive in the new country. They make great lamentations over their dead, and the women who are not killed, with all the servants, are shorn of their hair, and remain for many days in constant mourning. After weeping through all the day and night in which the death took place, they still continue to weep for a whole year. These Indians eat early in the morning, and they eat on the ground without troubling themselves much about cloths or napkins. After they have eaten their maize, with meat or fish, they pass all the rest of the day in drinking chicha, or wine made from maize, always holding the cup in their hands. They are very careful and orderly in their festive songs, the men and women holding hands, and going round to the sound of a drum. They recount former events in their songs and ditties, but they always go on drinking until they are very drunk. They believe in the immortality of the soul, and know that there has been a creator of all things in the world, so that in contemplating the grandeur of the heavens, the movements of the sun and moon, and other marvels, they understand that there was a creator of them all, but, blinded and deceived by the devil, they think that the same devil has power over all things. Some, however, seeing his villainy, and that he never tells the truth, abhor him, and they obey him more from fear than because they believe in his divinity. They hold the sun in great reverence, and believe it to be a god. The priests are much esteemed by the people. I shall conclude this chapter by saying that these people of Hakluyt use lances of palm wood, darts, and slings for fighting. The women are very amorous, and some of them are beautiful. There are still many mitimes here, descended from those who came here when the Incas ruled over these provinces. Chapter 42. Of the other villages between Lactachunga and Riobamba, and of what passed between the Adelantado Don Pedro de Alvarado and the Marshal Don Diego de Almagro. After traveling for some distance beyond Lactachunga, along the royal road which leads to the great city of Cusco, the buildings of Mulliambeto are reached, concerning which I have nothing more to say than that they are inhabited by Indians of the same nation and customs as those of Lactachunga. There were ordinary buildings at this station, where stores were deposited according to the orders of the officer delegated by the Inca, who obeyed the principal superintendent at Lactachunga. The chiefs looked to large stations, such as Quito, Tumabamba, Caxamarca, Zaxa, Vilcas, or Paria, and others of the same rank for orders. These stations were like the seat of a bishopric, or the capital of a kingdom, which gave the tone to all the parts, and whence came the officers who administered justice, or formed armies in case of war or insurrection. Nevertheless, affairs of great difficulty or importance were not decided upon without a reference to the king's Incas. The transmission of these references was arranged with such skill and order, that the post went from Quito to Cusco in 8 days. Every half-league along the road there was a small house, where there were always 2 Indians with their wives. One of these ran with the news that had to be transmitted, and, before reaching the next house, he called it out to the other runner, who at once set off running the other half-league, and this is done with such swiftness that neither mules nor horses could go over such rocky ground in a shorter time. But, as in the book of the King's Incas, which is the one that, with the help of God, will appear after this, I treat fully of these posts, I will not say more here, my present intention being merely to make things clear to the reader's understanding. From Mulliambeto the road leads to the river called Ambato, where there are also buildings which serve the same purpose as those already described. 3 leagues from this place are the splendid buildings of Mocha, which are so numerous and so grand, that I was astonished at the sight of them. But, now that the king's Incas have lost their power, all these palaces and buildings, with other grand works of theirs, have fallen into ruin, so that the vestiges of some of these edifices alone remain. As they are built of very beautiful stone, and as the masonry is excellent, they will endure for ages as memorials, without being entirely destroyed. Round Mocha there are several villages where the inhabitants and their women all go dressed. Their customs and language are the same as those of the Indians we have left behind. To the westward are the villages of Indians called Sechos, and to the east are the Pilaros. All these have great store of provisions, because their land is very fertile, and flocks of deer, some sheep of the kind called Peruvian, many rabbits, partridges, doves, and other game. Besides these, the Spaniards have large herds of cattle in all the plains and villages, and they breed extensively by reason of the excellent pasture. There are also goats, the country being well suited for them, and better swine than in any other part of the Indies, and they make as good ham and bacon as in the Sierra Morena. Leaving Mocha, the great buildings of Riobamba are reached, which are not less worthy to be seen than those of Mocha. They are in the province of the Puras, in the midst of beautiful plains, very similar to those of Spain in climate, in the flowers and grasses, and in other things, as every one knows who has traveled over them. For some days the city of Quito was established at Riobamba, before it was removed to its present site. But the buildings at Riobamba are more memorable for another event. The Adelantado Don Pedro de Alvarado, formerly governor of the province of Guatemala, which borders on the great kingdom of New Spain, set out with a fleet of ships filled with many knights, concerning whom I shall treat fully in the 3rd part of this work, and landed on the coast, where the fame of Quito reached the Spaniards. They marched inland by difficult and rugged forests, where they suffered from hunger and other hardships. I cannot and ought not to pass on without saying something concerning the evils and miseries which these Spaniards, and all others, suffered in the discovery of these Indies, because I hold it for very certain that no nation that has ever been in the world has passed through so much. It is a thing well worthy of note that, in less than 60 years, a navigation so long, and a land so vast and so full of different tribes should have been discovered, the way leading through dense and dismal forests, and over deserts without roads, and that these countries should have been conquered, and more than 200 cities founded in them. Surely those who have done this deserve great praise and everlasting fame, far more than my memory knows how to imagine, nor my weak hand to write. One thing is very certain, that the followers of Alvarado suffered so much on this road from hunger and fatigue, that many of them cast aside gold and precious emeralds, from want of strength to carry them. As soon as the arrival of the Adelantado Don Pedro de Alvarado was known in Cusco, through evidence brought by Gabriel de Rojas, the governor, Don Francisco Pizarro, although he was occupied in peopling that city with Christians, set out to take possession of the coasts of the South Sea, while he ordered his companion, the Marshal Don Diego de Almagro, to march in all haste to the province of Quito, place himself at the head of the troops then under the orders of his lieutenant, the Captain Sebastian de Belalcázar, and take every necessary precaution. By hasty marches the diligent marshal arrived in the province of Quito, and took command of the troops that he found there, speaking sharply to the Captain Belalcázar for having left Tangaraca without orders from the governor. The adelantado Don Pedro de Alvarado, accompanied by Don Diego de Alvarado, Gómez de Alvarado, Alonso de Alvarado, who is now Marshal of Peru, the Captain Garcilaso de la Vega, Juan de Saavedra, and other knights of high rank, arrived in the neighborhood of the camp of the Marshal Don Diego de Almagro. There was some danger of a rupture between them, but at last, by the intervention of the licentiate Caldera and other prudent persons, it was agreed that the adelantado should leave the fleet of ships he had brought, with the arms and troops, in Peru, and that, in consideration of the expenses of the expedition, he should receive 100,000 castellanos. This capitulation having been agreed to, the marshal took the troops into his service, and the adelantado proceeded to the city of the kings, where the governor Don Francisco Pizarro received him with the distinction that was due to so valorous a captain as Don Pedro de Alvarado. He received the 100,000 castellanos, and returned to his government of Guatemala. The agreement and capitulation above mentioned was made and agreed to in the buildings of Riobamba, concerning which I am now treating. It was also here that the Captain Belalcázar, who was afterwards governor of the province of Popayan, fought a battle with the Indians, in which, after many of them had been killed, the victory remained with the Christians. Chapter 43. Which treats of what there is to be said concerning the other Indian villages as far as the buildings of Tumabamba. These buildings of Riobamba, as I have already said, are in the province of the Puras, which is one of the best and most populous within the jurisdiction of the city of Quito. The men go dressed, as well as the women. They have the same customs as their neighbors, but are distinguished by the band round their heads. They all wear very long hair, and plait it in very small tails. The women do the same. They worship the sun, and those who are selected as most fit for such a business, converse with the devil. They have other rites and abuses, the same as those of the Incas who conquered them. When a chief dies they dig a deep square tomb, into which they put the body, with the arms and other effects of the deceased. Some of these tombs are made within the houses of the inhabitants. They have the same customs as the other natives of these parts, that is to say, they bury the most beautiful of the women of the deceased with the body. I have been told by the Indians that this is done because some among them, who are looked upon as men of credit, God permitting that, for their sins and idolatries they may at times be deceived by the illusions of the devil, have seen, or thought they saw, those who had long been dead walking, adorned with the things that were buried with them, and accompanied by their wives who had been buried alive. Seeing this, they concluded that where the souls went, women and gold should also be sent, and so they do as I have described. The reason why the son of the sister inherits, and not the son of the brother, I will relate hereafter. There are many villages in this province of the Puras, which I shall not further allude to, in order to avoid prolixity. To the east of Riobamba there are other villages in the forests near the sources of the river Marañón, and the mountain called Tingaragua, round which there are also many villages. The inhabitants have the same customs as all the others, they wear clothing, and their houses are built of stone. They were conquered by the kings Incas, and their captains speak the general language of Cusco, although they have their own tongue as well. To the westward there is a snowy region thinly inhabited, called Yercalazo. Near this land a road leads to the city of Santiago, which is called Guayaquil. Leaving Riobamba, some other buildings are reached, called Cayambe. All this country is bare and very cold. Beyond Cayambe are the Tampas, or lodgings of Teocaxis, situated on a large and bitterly cold plain, where the Indian natives fought the battle with the Captain Sebastian de Belalcázar, which is called Teocaxis. Although it lasted all day, and was very obstinately contested, neither party obtained the victory. 3 leagues further on are the important buildings called Ticazambi, which have the forests of Guayaquil on the right, and on the left Palmaleta, Quizna, Macas, and other regions as far as the Great River. The road then descends to the buildings of Chanchan, where, the country being warm, it is called by the natives Yunca, which means a warm land. There being no snow nor cold, the trees grow abundantly, besides other things which are not to be had in cold countries. For this reason all those who live in warm and genial countries are called Yuncas. They have this name now, and will never lose it while they exist, although ages should pass away. The distance between these buildings and the sumptuous royal edifices of Tumabamba is nearly 20 leagues, the whole intervening country being scattered over with depots and other buildings, at intervals of 2 or 3 or 4 leagues. Amongst these there are 2 principal stations, one called Canaribamba and the other Hatuncanari, whence the natives and their province took the name of Canaris, as they are now called. Right and left of the road there are numerous villages and provinces, which I shall not further mention, because the natives, having been conquered by the king's Incas, have the same customs as all the rest, speak the general language of Cusco, and wear clothes, both men and women. In the order of their marriages, rules of inheritance, and custom of burying food, arms, and live women with their dead, they are also the same as their neighbors. They all believe the sun to be God, but that there was also a creator of all things, whom, in the language of Cusco, they call Hiracoca. Although they now have this belief, they formerly worshipped trees, stones, and the moon, being prompted by the devil, our enemy, with whom some of them converse, and they obey him in many things. In our time, the wrath of God having been raised, the sacred evangel will be preached, and the light of faith spread abroad, so that they will abhor the devil. Already in many places where he was esteemed and venerated, he is now detested, and the temples of the accursed idols are destroyed, insomuch that there is no sign of an image, and many Indians have become Christians. There are now few villages in Peru without a friar or clergyman who teaches the people, and, in order that the Indians may more readily be made to understand their errors, and induced to embrace our holy religion, a grammar has been made, by which to speak their language, so that the priests and Indians may understand each other. The Reverend Father Don Domingo de Santo Thomas has labored much in this work. All along the road there are rivers, some small others larger, and all with excellent water. Over some there are bridges to pass from one side to the other. In former times, before the Spaniards gained this kingdom, there were great quantities of sheep in these mountains of the kind peculiar to this country, and a still greater number of huanacos and vicunas. But the Spaniards have slaughtered so many, that now there are scarcely any left. No wolves nor other mischievous animals have been met with in these parts, except the tigers, which I mentioned in describing the forests of Buenaventura, and some small lions. In the wooded ravines there are also some snakes, and in all parts there are foxes of the country, and other wild creatures. Of partridges, pigeons, doves, and deer, there is abundance, and in the vicinity of Quito there are many rabbits. Dantas, or tapirs, are met with in the forests. Chapter 44. Concerning the grandeur of the rich palaces of Tumabamba, and of the province of the Canaris. In some parts of this book I have alluded to the great power of the kings Incas of Peru, and to their surpassing valor, and how, along a distance of more than 1,200 leagues of coast which was under their rule, they appointed their delegates and governors, and formed many deposits full of all things necessary for their troops. In some of these depots there were lances, in others darts, and in others sandals, and so on with other arms and articles of clothing which these people use, besides stores of food. Thus, when a chief was lodged in one of these depots with his troops, there was nothing, from the most important to the most trifling article, with which they were not supplied. If there was any rising in the surrounding districts, they were ready to punish it with great severity, for the Incas were such perfect judges, that they did not hesitate to punish even their own sons. Besides these depots and lodgings throughout the kingdom, there were palaces and temples of the sun at every 10 or 20 leagues along the road, where there were priests, mamacunas, virgins, and more complete supplies than at the other stations. There were also governors, or chief captains, appointed by the Inca, with the Mitamese and Indians bound to service. In the time when there was no war, and when the Inca was not traveling in the neighborhood, the duty of these people was to collect the tribute in their districts, and see that all necessary supplies were kept in readiness. One of these stations was a grand affair, for, when a king died his successor disturbed nothing, but rather repaired and improved the place, for each Inca had his own palace, while that of his predecessor was ordered to be preserved as he left it. The famous buildings of Tumabamba are in the province of Canaris, and they were among the richest and most splendid in the whole kingdom of Peru. Certainly there is nothing which the Indians say of these buildings that did not appear to me to be even greater than their account, judging by the remains which still exist. To the westward is the province of Gancavalcas, which borders on the cities of Guayaquil and Puerto Viejo, and to the east is the great river Marañón, with its forests and some villages. The buildings of Tumabamba are situated in a plain more than 12 leagues in extent, near two small rivers. The climate is cold, and there is plenty of game, such as deer, rabbits, partridges, pigeons, and other birds. The temple of the sun is built of stones very cunningly wrought, some of them being very large, coarse, and black, and others resembling jasper. Some of the Indians pretend that most of the stones of which these buildings and the temple of the sun are built, have been brought from the great city of Cusco by order of the king Huayna Capac, and of the great Tupac Inca his father, by means of strong ropes. If this be true it is a wonderful work, by reason of the great size of the stones and the length of the road. The doorways of many of the buildings were very handsome and brightly painted, with several precious stones and emeralds let into the stone, and the interior walls of the temple of the sun, and of the palaces of the Incas, were lined with plates of the finest gold stamped with many figures. The roofs were of straw, so well put on that no fire would consume it, while it would endure for many ages. Within the buildings there were several bunches of golden straw, and sheep, lambs, birds, and many other things were sculptured on the walls. Besides all this, they say that there were enormous sums in gold preserved in jars and vases, and many rich vestments adorned with silver work and beads. In short, I am unable to describe the magnificence of these royal palaces of the Incas. The cloth in the storehouses was in such quantity, and so rich, that, had it been preserved and not lost, it would have been worth a great treasure. There were more than 200 virgins dedicated to the service of the sun, who were very beautiful, and natives of Canaris, the province governed by the chief superintendent of the Inca, who resided in these buildings. They and the priests were well cared for by those who had charge of the temple, at the doors of which there were porters. Near the temple and the palaces of the Incas there were many buildings used as lodgings for the troops, and as storehouses, which were always kept full. The natives of this province, called Canaris, are good-looking and well-grown. They wear their hair very long, so much so, that by that and a circular crown of wands, as fine as those of a sieve, the Canaris may easily be known, for they wear this headdress as a distinguishing mark. The women also wear their hair very long, and take a turn with it round their heads, by which they may be known as easily as their husbands. They dress in woolen and cotton cloth, with usages on their feet, which are, as I have said before, like sandals. The women are very pretty, amorous, and friendly to the Spaniards. They are great laborers, for it is they who dig the land, sow the crops, and reap the harvests, while their husbands remain in the houses sewing and weaving, adorning their clothes, and performing other feminine offices. When any Spanish army passed through their province, the Indians at that time being obliged to supply people to carry the baggage of the Spaniards on their backs, many of these Canaris sent their wives and daughters, and remained at home themselves. I saw this myself when we marched to join the licentiate Gasca, President of His Majesty, for they sent us a number of women who carried our baggage. Some Indians say that this arises from the dearth of men and the great abundance of women, owing to the cruelty of Atahualpa to the people of this province, when he entered it after having killed the captain general of his brother Huascar at Ambato, whose name was Atoko. They affirm that, although the men and boys came out with green boughs and palm leaves to seek for mercy, he, with a haughty air and severe voice, ordered his captains to kill them all. Thus a great number of men and boys were killed, and they say that now there are 15 times as many women as men, and, being so numerous, they have to work as they are ordered by their husbands or fathers. The houses of the Canaris are small, and built of stone with straw roofs. The land is very fertile, and abounds in provisions and game. The people worship the sun. The chiefs marry as many women as they please, but one is always the principal wife. Before the marriage takes place, they make a festival, and, after eating and drinking at their will, they perform other ceremonies according to the custom of the country. The son of the principal wife inherits the chiefship, although the chief may have many sons by other wives. They place their dead in tombs resembling those made by their neighbors, and also bury the women alive, together with arms and food. Some of these people are great magicians and sorcerers, but they do not practice the abominable crime, nor other sins and idolatries, but they certainly reverence the devil, and those who are selected for the purpose converse with him. At present the chiefs have become Christians, and, when I passed through Tumabamba, the principal chief was called Don Fernando. It has pleased our Lord and Redeemer that they should be worthy to be called his sons, and to come into the union of our Holy Mother Church, for they hear the sacred evangel, and his words bear fruit in them. The temples of these Indians have been destroyed. If the devil now deceives them, it is in an underhand way, as happens sometimes even to the faithful, and not openly, as was his wont before the standard of the cross of Christ was planted in these Indies. Very great events passed in the time of the Incas in these royal buildings of Tumabamba, and many armies have been assembled there for important objects. When the king died, the first thing that his successor did, after he had taken the royal fringe or crown, was to send governors to Quito and Tumabamba, with orders to take possession in his name, and to build rich palaces adorned with gold, like those of his predecessor. The Orjones of Cusco, the most learned and noble men in the kingdom, say that Inca Yupanqui, father of the great Tupac Inca, who was the founder of Tumabamba, enjoyed being here more than in any other place, and they say the same of Tupac Inca. They also affirm that while Huayna Capac was residing here, he heard of the first arrival of the Spaniards in the land, when Don Francisco Pizarro reached the coast in the ship with 13 companions, who were the first discoverers of Peru, and that he said that, after his days, a strange people would rule the land, like those who had arrived in the ship. He must have said this at the suggestion of the devil, as well as that the Spaniards would return to the country with great power. Now these buildings of Tumabamba are in ruins, but it is easy to see how grand they once were. The province of Canaris is very broad, and full of many rivers, in which there are great riches. In 1544, they discovered such great and rich mines in these rivers, that the people of the city of Quito extracted more than 800,000 pesos of gold. The quantity of this metal was such, that they often took out of the troughs more gold than earth. I affirm this, because I spoke with a man who had taken more than 700 pesos of gold out of a single trough, and besides what the Spaniards got, the Indians took an unknown quantity. In all parts of this province where wheat is sown, it yields abundantly, and so also does barley. It is believed also that great vineyards may be planted, and that all the fruits and pulses of Spain may be grown, as well as those of the country. There is no one of a good site for building a great city. When the Viceroy Blasco Núñez Vela passed this way, flying before the tyrannical fury of Gonzalo Pizarro and his followers, it is stated that he said that, if he should become governor of this kingdom, he would build a city on these plains, and divide the Indians among the settlers who should establish themselves in it. But, God permitting it for some reason which he alone knows, the viceroy was killed, and Gonzalo Pizarro ordered the captain Alonso de Mercadillo to found a city in these parts. As, however, the district was within the limits of Quito, he selected the province of Chaparra instead, as I will relate presently. The distance from the city of San Francisco de Quito to these buildings is 55 leagues. Here I will leave the royal road, along which we have hitherto been traveling, in order to give an account of the country in the neighborhood of the cities of Puerto Viejo and Guayaquil, and having done this I will again return to the royal road. Chapter 45. Concerning the road which leads from the province of Quito to the coast of the South Sea, and the bounds of the city of Puerto Viejo. I have now brought my narrative as far as the buildings of Tumabamba, and it is necessary that I should describe the cities of Puerto Viejo and Guayaquil, although I would rather go on, both because I have not been much in the latter districts, and because the natives are deficient in intelligence, and it is difficult to get information from them. Also because it seemed to me sufficient that I should conduct the reader along the royal road, but my obligation to satisfy the curious obliges me to give a true account of everything that has come within my observation, and I feel certain that this will be agreeable to all learned, benevolent, and judicious readers. Thus I make the following statements with all the truthfulness and exactness that I am master of. Having said so much concerning these provinces, I will then return to the royal road. To go, then, to these cities of Puerto Viejo and Guayaquil, it is necessary to take the road from Quito to the coast of the South Sea, and I will commence my account at Gac, which is the beginning of the one region and the boundary of the other. From Tumabamba there is no direct road to the coast, except in the direction of the city of San Miguel, the first settlement made by the Christians in Peru. In the district of Quito, not very far from Tumabamba, there is a province called Chumbo, but before reaching it there are other villages of various sizes, inhabited by Indians wearing clothes, with good-looking women. There are royal buildings in the villages, as in those we have passed, and the people obeyed the Lord's Incas, and used the general language which was ordered to be talked in all parts. The natives have the same customs as their neighbors, and the same religion, worshipping the sun and other gods, and believing in the immortality of the soul. They had relations with the devil, and, God permitting it for their sins, the evil one had great power over them. Now, as the holy faith is preached in every direction, many of them have become Christians, and friars are living amongst them, who teach them the things concerning the faith. The natives of these parts have a very well marked sign of distinction, by which they may be known of all men. When I was in Cusco people arrived there from all parts, and we knew by their distinguishing marks that some came from Canchais, others from Canas, others from Callao, others from Huancas, and others from Chachapoyas. This was, assuredly, an excellent invention, by means of which, in time of war, they could not mistake one tribe for another, and, in time of peace, each man knew his own countryman. Without some distinguishing mark, there would be many tribes gathered together by order of their chiefs, all of one color, with the same features and appearance, all without beards, the same dress, and using one language. In all these villages there are now churches where they say Mass, and great care is taken to teach the children their prayers, so that, with the help of God, there is hope that things will go on improving. From this province of Chumbo the road continues for 14 leagues over rugged and sometimes difficult ground, until a river is reached where there are always natives with balsas who ferry travelers across. This place is called the Pass of Huaynacapac, and it is said to be 12 leagues from the island of Puna. Further on the Indians are not so civilized as those we have passed, because some of them were not completely subjugated by the king's Incas. Chapter 46. In which an account is given of certain things relating to the province of Puerto Viejo, and also concerning the equinoctial line. The first port in the land of Peru is that of Pasaus, and from it and the river of Santiago the government of the Marquis Don Francisco Pizarro commenced, for to the northward the land falls within the limits of the province of San Juan, and thus it may be said that the land to the north is within the boundaries of the city of Santiago de Puerto Viejo, where, being so near the equator, the inhabitants are not very healthy. Touching the equinoctial line, some of the ancient cosmographers were in error when they affirmed that the heat was such as to render the country lying under it uninhabitable. The fertility of the land, and the abundance of all things necessary to sustain man, are manifest to all, and, as the equinoctial line is touched upon in several parts of this history, I will here give an account of what I have gathered from the best cosmographers concerning it. The equinoctial line is an imaginary line round the world from east to west, at equal distances from the poles of the earth. It is called equinoctial, because the passage of the sun across it makes the days and nights equal. This occurs twice in the year, namely on the 11th of March and 13th of September. It is to be understood, as I have already said, that the opinion of some ancient authors was that the country under this equinoctial line was uninhabitable. They believed this because, as the sun there sent its rays on the earth vertically, the heat must, as they thought, be so excessive that none could live. Virgil, Ovid, and other worthies were of this opinion. Others held that some part might be inhabitable, following Ptolemy, who says, "It does not follow that we should believe the torrid zone to be entirely without inhabitants." Others thought, on the contrary, that the climate was not only temperate and moderately warm, but very pleasant. This is affirmed by Saint Isidore, who says that the terrestrial paradise is a temperate and delightful place in the east, under the equinoctial line. Experience has now taught us that, not only the country exactly under the equinoctial line, but the whole torrid zone, from one tropic to the other, is habitable and fertile, by reason of the days and nights being almost equal. The coolness of the night tempers the heat of the day, and the land has its due season for growing and producing its fruits. This is the natural condition of the country, though some parts are different. The Indians of the province of Santiago de Puerto Viejo are not long lived, and, as regards the Spaniards, there are very few old men amongst them, though their number has been thinned more by the wars than by sickness. From this equinoctial line towards the Arctic Pole, the Tropic of Cancer is distant 420 leagues in 23½ degrees, and the sun arrives there on the 11th of June, but never passes beyond it, for it there takes a turn towards the equinoctial line again, and reaches it on the 13th of September. Then it descends to the Tropic of Capricorn, another 420 leagues, and also in 23½ degrees. There is, therefore, a distance of 840 leagues from tropic to tropic. The ancients called this the torrid zone, which is as much as to say the parched or toasted land, for the sun moves over it all the year. The natives are of middle height, and have a most fertile land, yielding abundance of maize, yuccas, ají, potatoes, and many other roots which are useful for the support of man. There are also plenty of guavas and aguacates, besides tunas of two kinds, one white and of excellent flavor, quemitos, and another fruit they call cirizilla. The melons are of two kinds, also, those of Spain and those of the country, and there are all sorts of beans and peas. The orange and lemon trees abound, also bananas, and pineapples of excellent flavor. There are great quantities of those pigs which, as I said before in speaking of the port of Yoruba, have the navel on the back, which, however, is not really the navel, but some other thing that grows there. As they did not find a navel below, they called this excrescence on the back a navel. The flesh of these pigs is very savory. There are also pigs of the Spanish breed, and many deer with the most singularly delicate flesh of any in Peru. Partridges, doves, pigeons, turkeys, and a vast number of other birds are found, among them one called zuda, which is about the size of a large duck, and which the Indians rear in their houses. These birds are tame and good to eat. There is another bird called Markha, very little smaller than a cock. It is a beautiful thing to see the colors of the plumage of this bird, and the beak, which is rather thicker than a finger, is most distinctly divided into two colors, yellow and red. In the forest they meet with foxes, bears, small lions, and some tigers and serpents, but they all fly from men who do not first attack them. There are also night birds of prey, as well inland as on the coast, such as condors, and the bird they call gallinazo, or ora. In the wooded ravines and forests there are many trees, which are useful for building houses and for other purposes. In some of these trees the bees make excellent honeycombs. The Indians have fisheries where they kill many fishes, among which are fish called bonitos, a bad kind of fish which causes fevers and other evils to those who eat it. In all parts of the coast the men are afflicted with dark-colored excrescences, the size of nuts, which grow on the forehead, nostrils, and other parts, and, besides being dangerous, they are very disfiguring. These bumps are said to be caused by eating a certain fish. However this may be, they are common on the coast, and, besides the natives, many Spaniards have been afflicted with these bumps. In this coast and territory, subject to the city of Puerto Viejo and to that of Guayaquil, there are two kinds of people. From the Cape of Passaus and river of Santiago to the town of Salongo, the men are marked in the face, and the mark begins at the root of the ear and descends to the chin, the breadth being according to each man's fancy. Some mark the greater part of the face, and others less, much after the fashion of the Moors. Both men and women wear mantles and shirts of cotton, and sometimes of wool. They also wear a few ornaments, such as jewels of gold and very small beads, called chakwira. In some provinces I have myself seen that the people put so high a value on these chakwiras, that they will give their weight in gold for them. In the province of Quinbaya, where the city of Cartago is situated, certain of the chiefs gave more than 1,500 pesos to the Marshal Robledo for little more than a pound weight of them, but at that time they gave 200 or 300 pesos for 3 or 4 glass diamonds. In the matter of selling to Indians, we were then pretty safe from being deceived by them. It has even happened to me to sell a copper axe to an Indian for its weight in gold. But things are now changed, and the Indians well understand how to sell what they have, and how to buy what they require. The principal places where the Indians mark their faces in this province are Pasaus, Zaramixo, Pimpaguas, Peclanzimek, the Valley of Zagua, Pecans, Apechig, Silos, Caniloja, Manta, Sapal, Mani, Zaragoza, and others. Their houses are of wood, roofed with straw, some small and others large, according to the means of the owner. Chapter 47. Treating of the question whether the Indians of this province were conquered by the Incas or not, and concerning the death which they inflicted on certain captains of Tupac Inca Yupanqui. Many Indians say that the Lords Incas never conquered, nor were able to bring under their yoke, these natives of Puerto Viejo, of whom I am now treating, though others affirm the contrary, saying that the Incas subjugated them, and had them under their orders. The latter say that Huayna Capac came in person to conquer them, and that, having been disobedient in some particular, he made a law that they and their descendants should have 3 of their front teeth pulled out in each jaw. They add that this custom was preserved for a long time in the province of Gancavalcas. In truth, as all vulgar reports are confused, and as the common sort can never tell the plain facts, it does not astonish me that they should relate these things, for in all things else the like reports are spread abroad, and become the talk of the people, being in reality mere fables. I make this digression here, that it may be borne in mind hereafter, for if things are repeated over and over again they become tiresome to the reader. This, therefore, will serve to give notice that many of the stories commonly reported among the people, concerning events which have happened in Peru, are fables. As regards the natives, those who have been curious in trying to learn their secrets know that what I say is the case. Concerning the government, and the affairs of war and of state which have occurred, I only look upon those principal men who were in high positions as authorities. These will relate what occurred, and the sayings of the people. Returning to the thread of my narrative, I have to say, according to what I have been given to understand by old Indians who were captains under Huayna Capac, that, in the time of the great Tupac Inca Yupanqui, his father, certain of his captains came, with a force collected from the ordinary garrisons of the provinces, and, by their politic arts, drew some of the chiefs to the service of Tupac Inca Yupanqui. Many of them went with presents to do him homage, and he received them with love and kindness, giving them rich pieces of woolen cloth made in Cusco. When they returned to their provinces, they esteemed him so highly for his great valor, that they called him father, and honored him with other titles, his benevolence and love for all being such that he acquired perpetual fame among them. In order to instruct them in things appertaining to the government of the kingdom, he set out in person to visit these provinces, and left governors in them who were natives of Cusco, that they might teach the people more civilized customs, and other useful things. But these natives not only did not wish to learn from those who remained in their provinces by order of Tupac Inca Yupanqui, in order to indicate to them a better mode of life, and to teach them agriculture, but, in payment of the benefits they had received, they killed them all, so that not one was left. They killed them, although they had done no ill, nor had they been tyrannical, so as to merit such treatment. Tupac Inca heard of this great cruelty, but he dissimulated, because, for other important reasons, he was unable to chastise those who had so treacherously murdered his captains and vassals. Chapter 48. How these Indians were conquered by Huayna Capac, and how they conversed with the devil, sacrificed to him, and buried women alive with the bodies of their chiefs. After the events which I have just alluded to as having occurred in the provinces near the city of Puerto Viejo, many of the natives relate that, in process of time, when the king named Huayna Capac was reigning in Cusco, he visited the provinces of Quito in person, and entirely subjugated all these Indians. It must be understood that all these occurrences in the history of the Indians are written from accounts given by the Indians themselves, who, having no letters, made use of a curious invention in order that their deeds and history might be recorded. Although these Indians were subject to Huayna Capac, and paid tribute in rich emeralds and gold, yet there were no buildings, nor depots, as in the other provinces we have passed through. The reason of this is that the country is poor and the villages small, so that the Orjones did not wish to live here, and held the country in small estimation. The natives of these villages were great sorcerers, and it is well known that no people in all Peru were so addicted to sacrifices and religious rites. Their priests had charge of the temples, and of the service to images which represented their false gods, before whom, at stated times, they recited songs and performed ceremonies which they learnt from their fathers, from whom they received the ancient customs. The devil, in frightful shape, appeared to those appointed for this accursed office, who were much respected by all the other Indians. Among these one gave replies, and heard what the devil had to say, who, in order to preserve his credit, appeared in a threatening form. Thus he let them know future events, and no battle or other event has taken place amongst ourselves, that the Indians throughout this kingdom have not prophesied beforehand. At the same time they never really knew, for it is clear, and must be believed, that God alone knows what will come to pass. If, therefore, the devil is right in anything, it is because his words are equivocal, and will bear many meanings. With his gift of subtlety, and his great age, which has given him experience in affairs, he speaks to the simple who will hear him, but many of the Gentiles know the deceitfulness of his replies. Thus, many of these Indians hold it to be certain that the devil is false and wicked, and they obey him more from fear than from love. At one time, deceived by the devil himself, at others by their own priest, they submit to his service by permission of Almighty God. In the temples, or wakas, they gave presents to objects which they held to be gods, and offered bloody sacrifices to them. And in order to do them more honor, they sacrificed something still more noble, namely, the blood of certain Indians, as many affirm. When they took any of their neighbors prisoners, with whom they had war or enmity, they assembled, as they themselves declare, and, after having got drunk with their wine, and also having made the prisoner drunk, the chief priest killed him with lancets of stone or copper. They then cut off his head, and offered it, with the body, to the accursed devil, the enemy of human nature. When any of them were sick, they bathed many times, and offered up sacrifices, praying for health. They mourned for their chiefs when they died, and put the bodies in tombs, together with some women alive, and all their most precious effects. They were not ignorant of the immortality of the soul, although they did not fully understand it. There can be no doubt that, by an illusion of the devil, the figures of persons who were dead, perhaps fathers or relations, appeared to these Indians in the fields in the dress they wore when living. By such false apparitions were these poor people made to obey the will of the evil one, and for this reason they buried people alive, together with the dead, that they may rise again with more honor. They held that by so doing they observed the rules of their religion, and obeyed their gods, and would go to a very delightful and pleasant place surrounded by the food and drink they were accustomed to when they were alive in the world. Chapter 49. In many parts of these Indies the people worshipped the sun, although they also believed in a creator whose seat was in heaven. The worship of the sun was either received from the Incas, or, as in the province of Gancavalcas, established from ancient times. The people of Gancavalcas, so they say, used to pull out 3 teeth in each jaw, the fathers doing it to their children when a very tender age, which they thought was no evil, but rather a service very acceptable to their gods. They marry in the same way as their neighbors. The chiefship is inherited by the son, according to the account which they gave me, and, failing sons, then the next brother, and, failing brothers, the sons of the sisters. There are some women who are good-looking. Among the Indians of whom I am now treating, the best flavored maize bread is made in all the Indies. It is so good and well kneaded, that it is even better than some wheaten bread. In some villages of these Indians they have a great quantity of skins of men full of ashes, the appearance of which is as frightful as those in the valley of Lyle, near the city of Cali. They have heard the preaching of many clergymen and friars, and begin to understand that our faith is the perfect and true one, and that the teaching of the devil is false, so that his deceitful communications have ceased. In all parts where the holy evangel is preached, a cross is placed at which the devil is terrified and flies away. But it is true that the faith impresses itself more on the young than on the old, for as the latter are grown old in their vices, they do not cease to commit their former sins in secret, and in such sort that the Christians cannot detect them. The youths listen to our priests, and follow our Christian doctrine, so that in these districts there are good and bad, as in all other parts of the world. Chapter 50. How in ancient times the Indians of Manta worshipped an emerald as their god, and of other things concerning these Indians. In many histories which I have seen, I have read, if I am not mistaken, that in some countries they worshipped God in the form of a bull, in others of a cock, in others of a lion, and that there have been 1,000 superstitions of this kind, which seem to afford matter for laughter more than anything else. I will only remark, therefore, that the Greeks, among whom there were excellent worthies, whose memory will last as long as writing itself, fell into these errors, as also did the Egyptians, Bactrians, and Babylonians. Grave and learned doctors say that the Romans had many gods, and that they worshipped those from whom they had received benefits, such as Jupiter or Saturn. These gods, however, were men and not brutes. These Indians, too, notwithstanding that they worshipped the sun and moon, also adored trees and stones, and other things suggested by their imaginations. I was informed, at the same time, that their priests saw the devil, who communicated perdition to their souls. In the important temple of Pachacamac they held a she-fox in great veneration, and worshipped it. In this province, also, the Lord of Manta had an emerald of great size and value, which the people and their ancestors held in great veneration. On certain days it was publicly displayed, and worshipped as if it contained some deity. On these occasions if any man or woman was sick, they performed a sacrifice, and then came forward to pray to the stone. They affirmed that the priest, who conversed with the devil, gave them to understand that the stone would bring health to them in requital for their offerings, after they and other ministers of the devil had applied to it. People who were afflicted with sickness came to Manta from all parts of the interior to offer gifts and perform sacrifices, and the Spaniards, who first discovered this kingdom, have told me that they found great riches in this town of Manta, and that it always yielded more than those which bordered on it to the encomienderos. They also say that, although threats and menaces have been resorted to discover where this great and rich emerald is concealed, they have never been able to find it, nor will the natives betray the place if they are all killed, so great is the veneration in which it is held. This town of Manta is on the coast. In the interior there are more villages and more people, and they differ in language from those on the coast, but they have the same food. The houses of those inland, called serranos, are of wood and small, the roofs of straw or palm leaves. They have some flocks of Peruvian sheep, but not so many as there are in Quito or in the province of Cusco. The serranos were not such sorcerers and magicians as the natives of the coast, nor were they so wicked in practicing the abominable sin. There is hope of some gold mines in some of the rivers of these mountains, and there is certainly a very rich emerald mine, but although many captains have tried to discover it, they have not succeeded, nor will the natives tell them where it is. It is true that Captain Olmos is said to have known where this mine was, but I think that surely he would have told his brothers or some other persons. Certainly the number of emeralds that have been brought to Puerto Viejo is very great, and they are the best in all the Indies, for though emeralds are more numerous in the new kingdom of Granada, they are not so good, so that the best there do not equal in value the most ordinary ones here. The carracks formed another tribe. They are not laborers, and are less intelligent than their neighbors, being a disorderly people, and making war for very slight causes. When a child was born they put its head between two boards, so that at the age of 4 or 5, the head was long and broad, but flat behind. Not content with the heads that God gives them, they thus make them into the shapes that please them most. They themselves say that they force their heads into these shapes that they may be more healthy, and be able to do more work. Some of these people, especially those near the village of Colima, to the northward, go naked. They relate that Huayna Capac arrived here, after having put to death the chiefs as far as Colima, where he ordered a fort to be built. Seeing that the Indians went naked, he did not go any further, but returned, leaving orders to his captains to conquer and subjugate as far as the river Santiago. Many of the Spaniards who came with the Adelantado Don Pedro de Alvarado, especially the Marshal Alonso de Alvarado, and the captains Garcilaso de la Vega, Juan de Saavedra, and another gentleman named Suer de Cangas, told me that when they landed on the coast with the said Adelantado Don Pedro, and came to this village, they found many vases full of gold, silver, and precious stones, besides a great quantity of emeralds, so that they gained much wealth for their valor. But many said that the emeralds were of glass, so, to try the question, for some considered they might be stones, they determined to beat them with hammers, saying that if they were of glass they would soon break, but if they were of stone the blows would have no effect. Thus, from want of knowledge and experience, they broke many of these emeralds, and profited little by having found them. Nor did they enjoy their gold and silver, for they suffered much from cold and hunger, and left their loads of treasure in the forests.